It's just asked me to step aside, so I'm a bit worried. Does that mean I have a temperature? Fuck. I can actually take this off because I am safely in home quarantine after returning to Australia from Indonesia. So in today's video, I just want to share a little bit about what it was like being in Indonesia while this pandemic was unfolding. So I flew from Perth to Lombok on the 9th of March. Now this was before any of the border closures had occurred, before we really knew a lot about coronavirus in Australia or Indonesia. When I flew over, I just to be on the safe side was wearing a bandana across my face, and that was more of just a precautionary thing. Little did I know when I was eventually coming back I would need one of these bad boys because things escalated very quickly. I'm just at the harbour, Bangsal Harbour in Lombok, and I'm taking the local boat which only costs $1.50, and you just have to wait until there's 40 people here and then we jump on the boat and we go. So I'm number 18, so just waiting a little while. So I went straight from Lombok to the Gili Islands, which is where I base myself for a lot of the time. And I had planned to stay there for 2 months. Now, the first week was pretty much business as normal. At this point, the coronavirus had been detected in a few regencies in the island of Java, which is directly west of Bali, so it was still quite far from Lombok. On the 11th of March, news came through that a British tourist had died in Bali from the coronavirus, and that was the first case of this virus starting to encroach further from Java that I became aware of. So on Sunday night of the 15th, the government ministers actually met and decided that they were going to close off the 3 gilis from tourists from Bali coming into that West Nusa Tenggara Regency.
Gili Trawangan, Gili dan Gili.
So all the fast boats that come to Gili with many tourists from Bali every day, they were suddenly going to be stopped. They said it was going to last 2 weeks, and the aim was to protect the image of the island as being safe and free from the virus so that when it reopened, tourists would feel comfortable to come back here. So the following morning on the 16th, there was a mass exodus of tourists from the Gili Islands. Everyone was panicking because, of course, if those fast boats are going to stop coming to the Gili Islands, they're going to stop doing the return trip also. Sampai jumpa! I personally didn't need to do that because I was flying from Lombok, the mainland of the Gili Islands, not from Bali, which is west of there. So for me, there was no problem. I was happy to stay there. So after that, the vibe did change a bit. There were still some tourists left, but they did drop off over the following days back via Lombok because that route was still open, taking the local boat. So it was kind of almost like this romantic being stranded on a desert island. I had all my local friends there, so we were cooking, and many of the businesses were still open within the first few days. Ones that are more targeted to Western tourists, they all started to close one by one because there was a major lack of business there, with mostly just locals and expats who lived on the island remaining. So we were cooking and still going to the beach every day, getting our vitamin C and vitamin sun. And having little bonfires on the beach.
Down in the island, you're so, back up your timing, beside me, down in the island.
It was a really nice time there, and we felt that we had almost like a false sense of security because we'd been cut off from the area that was known to have the virus. So as far as we knew, this area was deemed safe. There was no testing, so there was no way to know for sure that it wasn't there, but we all assumed that we were safe there. So we just started to do the standard kind of social distancing practices. When I was inside in an enclosed space with other people, I would pop my little bandana over my face just as a precaution. And of course, we're all washing our hands and increasing that personal hygiene as everyone has been around the world to try and stop the spread. Whis, what you doing?
Steril.
Give away the corona.
Yeah.
Good job. But all in all, we felt pretty safe there.
So you can take it or leave it.
And then a couple of days later, on the 18th, the Australian government issued a do not travel advice for Australians to go to any country around the world.
We are upgrading the travel ban on Australians to level 4 for the entire world. That is the first time that has ever happened in Australia's history. The travel advice to every Australian is do not travel abroad. Do not go overseas.
That did get me thinking that perhaps I should start to think and consider about returning to Australia sooner than I had originally anticipated. For me, as someone who considers myself almost like an expat of Indonesia, I spend a lot of time there and I have a lot of friends there. There was no rush for me to suddenly come back. I didn't have, employment in Australia, which I needed to rush back to. So if I was going to be delayed for a couple of weeks or something like that, it wasn't a big concern for me. And this was obviously early when this was still such a fast developing story. And then 2 days later, on the 20th, the Indonesian government then increased their border control and they stopped giving tourist visas on arrival. So basically anyone who hadn't already had a business visa, social visa or KIDAS, something like that, already organised, anyone who was newly trying to get into the country wasn't allowed. The following morning on the 21st, I read an article which said that another person in Bali had died from the disease, a French tourist. And the thing that worried me about this story was that he'd actually died a whole week earlier and had originally been listed as cause of death being alcohol related because he'd been seen at a bar earlier that day. And it wasn't until there was some pressure to actually test him for coronavirus that it was found that he did also have coronavirus, which made me realize that, look, there is not enough testing being done in this country. People are either not being tested for symptoms or causes of death aren't being closely checked as they should be with coronavirus in mind. So it was at that point that I decided to move my flight forward, but then my new flight got cancelled and I realized I wasn't going to be able to fly directly from Lombok to Perth and I would have to go via Bali. Then on the 25th of March, Australia actually increased their travel advice to an absolute blanket travel ban unless you have some special exemption for medical or work, but general traveling out of the question. So I left on the local boat back to Lombok and the most stressful thing happened. Oh my God. So as we were getting off the local boat onto the mainland of Lombok, there were people there they were all suited up and they had the temperature guns. And so they were checking people's temperatures coming off the islands to make sure that we didn't have fevers. And I walked up and they did my temperature and he was just like, "Excuse me, you need to step aside." I was like, oh my God, what? Okay, so I've just got off the boat from Gili Trawangan and he's just asked me to step aside. So I'm a bit worried. Does that mean I have a temperature? Fuck. It's better. Only caught a glimpse of it. I didn't see what the very last figure was, but it was 37 point something. So obviously above 37. If you're above 38, that's when you're deemed to have a fever. So I was panicking.
Excuse me?
Yeah?
Can I? Are you feeling hot?
No?
No?
I mean, from carrying.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Andre?
Apa nomor?
138. Okay. Yeah, I think you just need a little bit.
Take a rest? Okay. I'll just sit and wait for my temperature to come down. Yeah? I hope it's because of the weather. And I was like, oh, well, I mean, I'm hot as in, it's a hot day. It's over 30 degrees and humid. And I've just carried my suitcases off this boat in, uneven water and almost fell into the water. So yeah, I mean, I built up a sweat and I was feeling physically hot, not feverish, however. After I'd sat for a minute, he tested it again and tested another guy with, another machine to make sure that there was no faults. And both came up as 37 on the dot. 37 now.
Okay.
So I'm free to go.
Sit.
Okay.
Okay.
Sahat. that was so lucky. I was stressing. And then on the way through, back through Lombok Airport, back through Bali Airport, I had my temperature scanned another few times on the way through, and it was all totally normal. Home stretch, about to get the last flight from Bali back to Perth. On that afternoon, only 3 flights of about 40 on the board actually flew to schedule. Most were cancelled. That was a very nerve-wracking afternoon waiting at the airport. And then arriving back in Perth airport, again, tested, totally fine, fill out all the health forms. Oh my God, clean bill of health, and back on Australian soil. I landed back in the country on the 26th and was very glad to have made it, because I mean, I'd happily be stuck on an island in Indonesia. That's actually a dream of mine, but there was certain things going through my mind which I had to consider. It wasn't just me and my own excitement of having this adventure. And, you know, I'm all about the off-road travel and, you know, living local style. So for me, that actually is quite fun. But when I considered the health issues and the fact that this virus was probably a lot more rife in the country than what data was reflecting, the death rate was quite high, which to me indicated that there were not many tests being done. There's probably a whole lot more people with this disease than what the data is showing. People are not being tested. And as someone who had the option to fly back to a Western country, not only from a selfish point of view, that if I did get sick, I have world-class healthcare for free, thank you Medicare, here in Australia, but also the social responsibility of, even if I could pay for it, I don't want to be clogging up a system when there are millions of Indonesians who could be falling ill with this disease who have no other option. There's a lot of beautiful things I'm seeing come through on social media, like a group of Indonesian reggae musicians did a little campaign via Instagram encouraging people to stay home. Of course, Jakarta, they do have a state of emergency, but that's just in the metro area of the capital of the main island. But Indonesia is an archipelago of hundreds of inhabited islands, and this disease has slowly spread to other regencies and islands. So for the Indonesian government to not yet enforce a lockdown nationwide, the local people are actually taking it upon themselves to encourage each other, look, stay at home, we can do this, stop the spread. But this is something that is going to go down in history, and we have the chance here to actually make a positive difference and to try to make the timeline of this pandemic shorter than what it could be. So we all have a responsibility, and we all have the opportunity to actually write history. So please, everybody, stay inside, wash your hands, whatever you can do, do it, and we're all in this together.